confirmation of the loyalist support in the province?
Yes, I do, particularly since Mr. Powell has been preaching what he calls the rebuilding of the magnificent monolith of Unionist unity. And of course the policies which he has been preaching are to overturn British government policy in Northern Ireland for the last 5 years.
Is the magnificent monolith of Protestant unity another word for the Protestants' ascendancy?
I would say that it is our people, which is what he talks about now consistently.
I see Mr. Brian Faulkner in Northern Ireland, but Mr. Faulkner, you came in halfway through the discussion. I'd just like a comment from Mr. T. Utley. Do you see this as a step away from what you were fighting for in Northern Ireland, Mr.
Well, I think the total results are certainly that. And I think that actually they're going to involve some embarrassment eventually, even to Mr. Enoch Powell, because, I mean, just let's look very briefly at what is likely to happen. I mean, what these 11 Unionists...
Can I just chip in for one moment and tell you that there is a recount at Fermanagh and South Tyrone, and what do you think the significance of that is, Mr. Utley?
Well, I think the significance of that is that, as we know, Harry West may well be defeated, and of course that has...
But he is the present leader of the
UUC,
yes.
And Mr. Powell would be the obvious choice as his successor.
Can I, on that, go to Mr. Brian Faulkner, the last Prime Minister of Northern Ireland before direct rule. Mr. Faulkner, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Robin.
What is your comment on that comment by Mr. Utley that Mr. Powell may emerge as the leader of the Unionist, and Mary Holland's earlier comment that because of his the diminished majority in down south, that this has somewhat hampered his prestige?
Oh, I imagine the people who brought him over here, the Paisley, Craig, West triumvirate, will be bitterly disappointed with his poor showing in South Down. Whether that'll make any difference to his sway, I would imagine there'll be a battle of personalities for leadership in that group.
I've always found in politics that on election night we say the majorities are down and so on, but after election night nobody ever gives a hoot about what majority people got, whether it was 5,000 and 6,000, so far as political influence is concerned.
You almost said a tinker's cuss there, I think. But I think in South Down they probably will remember this. I think in Northern Ireland generally they'll remember it. But of course...
Mr. Faulkner, can I interrupt? I apologise. A loyalist gain in Mid-Ulster has just come up on the screen. Your comment on that?
That this was a very touch-and-go constituency. I'm not really surprised at that result, because the anti-loyalist vote, so-called, was apparently very gravely split between SDLP and other people. It's not a surprising result, but I would think that in Fermanagh, South Tyrone, it must be very, very close between Harry West and his
That is
opponent.
Mr. Dunlop of the Loyalist coalition.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Faulkner, do you think that the cause you were working for in the last couple of years, that of power sharing and the Irish dimension and of the construction of bridges between the two communities, that this is now lost and we are back to what Mr. Powell calls the magnificent monolith of Protestant unity?
No, I don't believe that for one moment. I'm quite convinced that Northern Ireland will never make progress unless there's stability. And I don't believe you'll get stability unless you have some form of power sharing within the United Kingdom. But you see, this vote today has been really a border referendum in Northern Ireland. The people were just voting on a simple issue. Do they want to stay in the United Kingdom or do they want to leave it? And they shrunk from leaving the United Unionist council candidates because they felt if they did, they would be weakening their determination to stay within the United Kingdom. I think it was as simple as that. It's a disappointing result overall, but it's not really a surprising one, and I don't really think that it has relevance to future elections in Northern Ireland, where I'm convinced the majority of the population, both Protestant and Roman Catholic, support the kind of policies that we were pursuing in the executive, namely sharing administrative responsibility in a Northern Ireland government.
Can I just ask for a comment on that first from Mary Holland?
Well, I think that Mr. Faulkner's own personal prestige in South Down probably contributed considerably to the big SDLP vote. He virtually called on his supporters to vote for the SDLP candidate. and I wonder now if he wishes that he had stood in that constituency against Mr. Powell for power sharing, for the policies that he advocated.
Did you hear that, Mr. Faulkner?
I did. I never considered standing in the constituency of South Down on this business. After all, I am the leader of a new party that's only been in operation for a few weeks. We only fielded 2 candidates in this election, and the leader of a party mustn't be expected to go out supporting the candidates of other parties either, in South Down or anywhere else. But I do believe that in that South Down result there is a lesson for the people who thought that they could use the Powell name for victory.
Thank you very much indeed. And incidentally, there was a slight error in our announcement about Mid-Ulster. It's the Loyalist Coalition holding Mid-Ulster, according to something which has been handed to me. Is that right, Alistair?
Yes, that's right, Robin, and here is the full result which we were able to give Mr. Dunlop, and indeed, as Mr. Faulkner indicates there, a big vote for the Republican Club's candidate probably did mean that Mr. Cooper, the moderate SDLP, failed to chase up the Ulster Unionists very successfully.
The total Unionist vote is about the same. Last time it was split, this time it's united. It's about the same as last time. Mr. Cooper has put on 11% onto the SDLP vote compared to last February.
And now back to Robin, who I think has Mr. Enoch Powell down the line to Southdown.
Good afternoon, Mr. Powell.
Hello, Robin. Long time no see.
Yes, I'm sorry not to have talked to you in recent weeks. May I just ask if you recall those lines which you once quoted from Houseman? Do you feel that there has been a just use in this election of those weapons stored in the arsenals of divine vengeance?
The weapons are there all right in the arsenal, and I thought that the United Kingdom result indicated a further application of them. But so far as South Down is concerned, the important thing is that the Unionist vote was up by between 2,000 and 3,000, showing that the process of reunification of the different strands of unionism in Northern Ireland is going ahead. That's the most important result to me.
It's been suggested here, Mr. Powell, that the reduced majority in your constituency will affect your prestige among the Ulster Loyalists and will diminish your chances of becoming their parliamentary leader.
Oh dear. Well, we shall have to see about that, shan't we?
Yes, we will indeed. What do you think is the truth of the matter?
I haven't given the question of my chances there a thought. The point is that we, the 12 of us, have fought as a single team for the second time in 1974. That is the central fact, and the increased Unionist vote in South Down gives emphasis to it.
Mr. Powell, do you take credit, as again has been suggested here this afternoon, for perhaps being the influential cause which, in saying vote Labour, which just tipped Labour over the line to a narrow majority?
I hope so. One can never prove these things. I hope so. And of course, from the point of view of those of us who are determined to see Britain outside the common market in its present form, this is a particularly gratifying result, since it is perfectly obvious that Labour would not be able to go on governing but for the votes of those whose sole object in voting Labour in Great Britain was to ensure that the renegotiation was carried on, the fundamental renegotiation, and that there was an eventual decision through the ballot box.
May I put to you a point which I would have put had I had a chance to do during the campaign, to suggest to you that you're a bit out of date on this point about fundamental renegotiation, because the Labour Party now is not as many would say, fundamentally renegotiating, because Mr. Callaghan has said he is not going to renegotiate the treaties, and therefore nothing in his renegotiation can affect the parliamentary sovereignty aspects which worry you so deeply.
Well, you have to explain how he can possibly square that with the precise words of a February manifesto, which were expressly reaffirmed in the manifesto on which the Labour Party fought this election. So far as I'm concerned, I believe they are the prisoners, willing or otherwise, of those promises which undoubtedly at the margin have secured them the right to govern at all.
Can I put to you what Lord Hailsham said during the campaign? Mr. Powell is so intent for personal reasons on ruining Mr. Heath that no attack, however violent, however irrational, is beyond him in his present frame of mind.
Well, there's only one person who ruined Mr. Heath, and that's Mr. Heath. As I told him in the House of Commons in 1972, it is absolutely fatal to attempt to govern on principles opposite to those on which you were elected. He needs no one else to ruin him after doing that.
Do you advise the Conservative MP to choose a new leader, Mr. Powell?
I'm not going to give advice to members of another party. The United Ulster Unionists have no commitments to any other party. I'm not a member of a Conservative party. Of course, I'm a Tory, but that's a different matter. Very different matter indeed, in many respects.
Do you hope
so I'm not going to interfere in other people's business.
Do you hope to rejoin the Conservative Party? Because you once said, and have often said, I was born a Tory and will die a Tory.
Indeed, and a Tory I am, which wouldn't apply to many members of the present Conservative front bench. But the answer to your question is that I hope that the Conservative Party, in its better mind, will see the necessity and justice of the case which is being put forward by the United Ulster Unionists, and that it will be possible for them, by affirming that policy, to secure the adherence of the United Ulster Unionists, and thus to reunite or reknit what used to be a very firm and important alliance.
Finally, Mr. Powell, on your new party, Lord Hailsham said of that, Enoch has found another cause to betray. What is your comment on that?
I leave people to judge for themselves, though I do not think their judgment generally agrees with that of Lord Hailsham.
Would you just hold one moment, Mr. Powell, because I have Lord O'Neill of the Main here, a former Unionist Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, and I wondered if he would like to make a comment to Mr. Powell, and in particular Mr. Powell's reported reference to the magnificent monolith of Protestant unity.
Did I say that? Did I use the word Protestant? You have inserted the word Protestant into what I said, which is an example of the I know it was unintentional on your part.
I apologise, Mr. Powell. Tell us what you did say. I didn't do it intentionally. I understood that was what you said.
No, but that's what's significant, in that I, not having used the word Protestant at all, you thought you were reporting me correctly when you inserted it. I said that the increased Unionist vote, the increased vote for the UUU candidate, as compared even with February, between 2,000 and 3,000, showed that the reknitting of the strands of union in this province is going ahead. That's what I said.
What did you say it was a magnificent monolith of?
I don't remember using the word monolith. I think it must be yours.
Mary Holland corrects me, and is on your side on this point, that you said the magnificent monolith of Unionist unity.
In a rally at the Ulster Hall.
In a rally at the Ulster Hall.
Oh, I see.
Penny has dropped, has it?
Oh, yes. Well, I would like to see it. Indeed, a monolith. I would like to see these strands so closely reunited that it would be no exaggeration to describe their unity as monolithic. I thought you were misunderstanding once again what I'd said this afternoon.
No, I'm glad you corrected me on the language, because we have a duty to get it right. But hold on for Lord O'Neill, who I think would like to make a comment to you about your attitude in Ulster.
Well, I'm not going to make a comment about his attitude, but I am gratified to see that he got a lower majority, a lower majority than Willie Orr, who for many years was the MP but didn't live there and latterly very seldom went there.
Why are you gratified? Do you think Mr. Powell is a force for evil in Ulster?
Well, I regret very much what Mr. Powell stands for, and whatever he may or may not have said about the shipyard, I'm perfectly sure that Mr. Powell is not in favour of regional development in the way that I was when I was Prime Minister and brought in new industry.
What about that, Mr. Powell?
I should have thought that what Lord O'Neill has said is evidence of his own bitter and frustrated state of mind. I can well understand that. But that for a former Ulster Prime Minister to regret the signs of Ulster Unionism being reunited does seem to me to be the ultimate in self-contradiction.
Well, in my day, the Unionist Party was a very much more moderate party than the members with whom Mr. Powell is now associated.
And look what happened.
Well, if we're not going to have moderation, then we risk having civil war, and I, at least, will not be responsible for that.
And I just put one point to you, Lord O'Neill, do you not see that on a democratic basis, perhaps 50–60% of the vote in Northern Ireland have again rejected the cause of power sharing? And when a democracy does that, how can people for whatever reason, force something down their throat which they don't want.
Oh, I fully accept what you say, Mr. Day, but it doesn't alter the fact that I'm very depressed, because I do not see how you can have peace in Northern Ireland unless you have something like power sharing.
Final comment from you, Mr. Powell.
Simply that I'm not depressed. I'm sorry that Lord O'Neill is, but one can understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. And we look forward to you reappearing in Parliament, whatever any individual person may think of your particular views.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Well, now, that was a very interesting exchange. Mr. Powell, I think, has plainly had a very long day, wouldn't you say, David?
I thought it was one of the most extraordinary kinds of exchange and interview. I don't pretend to understand Ulster politics. I think I understand a little less after that exchange.